So, you want to be a great writer? Don't listen to my advice. Let's listen to someone who knows what they're talking about. Let's follow the advice of Stephen King. His first piece of advice is, if you don't succeed at first, get a bigger nail. This is where, when he was a young writer, he'd send off stories and get rejected, and he had a nail up on his wall and he tacked the rejections up on there. And it got to the point where he had so many rejections, it pulled the nail out the wall, so he put up a bigger nail. And basically it's about persistence, and I agree with that. I struggled for over 10 years writing books, editing them, writing to the best of my ability at that time, sending them out, and I got rejected by tons of agents, all of them that would cover fantasy. I'd complain a bit, talk to my friends, have a little cry, have a little drink, wallow. Right, then I'd start writing the next book and try again and try again and try different genres and all sorts of different things and feel my way forward, and gradually got better and better. And he's right, it's about persistence. I think it's Joe Abercrombie that basically said, the longer you dance in the rain, the more likely it is you'll be struck by lightning. And the only person that can stop you doing that is basically you. So if you never go outside, you're never going to get struck by lightning. And it's the same thing. The only person that can stop you, really, is you. If you write 3 books and you get rejected and you think, no, I'm done, that's it, I don't want to write anymore, and you just give up, then that's absolutely your choice. It's absolutely valid. But you can always try again. You can always do another book. You can always try and improve your craft. His second rule is that he writes 6 pages every day. Okay, I don't agree with this one. I think it works for him. I think the idea where some people say you should write every day, I also don't think that's good advice either. It can lead to lots of problems. Also, for most authors, not the ones that you've heard of, like the Stephen Kings and the rest of us, you know, the really big authors, everyone else has to fit their writing in around everything else that's going on in their life. Having a job, first and foremost. Having a family, having a social life, because you need to have all of these things. And yes, writing does require some sacrifice in terms of time, taking time away from something else to write. It doesn't mean you become a celibate monk and you spend 20 hours a day writing and don't do anything else, because, you know, you'd go mental for starters. But writing 6 pages a day works for him. I think what he's actually saying, what I agree with, is you should write as often as you can and as much as you can. And I also talk about, when you're writing, don't try and block out 4 hours when you're first starting to write. Say, right, I'm just going to write for those 4 hours, I'm going to write thousands of words and get through it, because trying to write consistently for 4 hours is incredibly difficult. So what I would suggest is you have small slices of time that you gradually build up. Like if you can find 30 minutes to write 3 times a week, and in those 30 minutes you do nothing else, you turn off your phone, you turn off your social media, you know, lock the door, whatever it might be, and you write for those 30 minutes, and you do that 3 times a week. Do that for 6 months and then see where you are. And if 30 minutes is easy, or you can write for an hour and you're able to carve out an hour 2 or 3 times a week, do that. And that will build up over time. It's just gradually chipping away at that mountain, because writing a novel is very much a marathon, it's not a sprint. His third rule is to go where the story takes you. And I agree with this. Even for me, who's someone who plans my stories, for him it's more of a case of he starts with an idea and he knows roughly what's going to happen at the beginning, but it's part of the discovery process and it evolves over time. And he's spoken about the past where he'd seen another author years ago saying they always write the last line. And for Stephen King, that's the kind of the death knell. It spoils the ending and all you're doing is working towards a target. It depends. I never have the last line. I know the beginning, the middle and the end roughly, but I have creative leaps and I move between the kind of milestones and I don't know how I get between them. And sometimes some of those creative jumps will change the shape of the story. Never radically, because I'm never one of these people who say, oh, I wrote 280,000 and I ended up chucking out 100,000 words and then writing another 50,000 and then eventually I found the story. That sounds so inefficient for me and so much of a nightmare. I'm not a discovery writer to that degree. I work better within a framework. I have tried it the other way. If you can do it the Stephen King way of you have a bit of a seed of idea and you develop it and just want to see how the characters grow, go for it. But if you need more of a structured approach, then that's fine too. It's what works for you that will help you get to the end of that first draft. His next rule is that the good ideas will stay with you. He thinks having a notebook and writing them down is a bad idea, and if it's an idea worth pursuing, it will stick around in your head. And I agree and disagree. I think writing ideas down and keeping notes is a good way to keep track of things, because sometimes I do that. I get bits of ideas and I scribble them down, and then over time I add to them and I flesh them out. But when I come back and look at these ideas in a notebook, some of them, with a bit of hindsight, I think, yeah, they're worth developing, and others I think, I'm not quite sure now. But if I'm just trying to keep track of all of them in my head, at the same time as the novel I'm working on at the time, and editing another one, and thinking about other things, it's never a good idea for me. So, I sometimes carry bits of ideas in my head and develop them, and then when I've got the kind of rough framework, then I'll write it down. But never writing anything down and just relying on your memory, I don't think that's a good idea. His next rule is, first you read and copy other writers, and then gradually you'll build up your own style when you're writing your own stories. And I agree with that. I think that's something you do instinctively. When you're trying to find your own style, your own voice, your own way of writing, it isn't that reading within the genre for me makes me want to copy certain things. I admire certain elements of some authors and think, oh, they're really good at doing that. Is there a way that I can do something similar in my own way? So if I say for someone like Robin Hobb is incredibly good at characters, my characters are not the same as hers, and I don't talk about characters in the same way that she does. But I have quite a strong focus on characters in my style. Equally, there might be another author, I can't think of one offhand, who does something and I think, oh, I don't like the way they do that. Even if I enjoy the book, even if generally I think it's quite a good read, I might read something and say, oh God, they spend far too much time on this element and it slows the pace down. That's something I don't want to do. There again, I'm not saying you should read bad books in order to do that, but it's good to pick up things that you think, I like that kind of thing, I like that kind of thing. But to begin, when you first do it, it will just kind of feel like a Me Too product until you develop your own style. So that's a good piece of advice. But the only way you're going to find it is by writing a book, looking at it, assessing it, then doing another one, and then doing another one, and keep going until you've got more of a clear version of your own style. His sixth rule is writing is self-hypnosis. You need to have a routine. And I agree with that. I have that with myself, with my own kind of writing. Some people can write anywhere, in coffee shops, on a train, on a bus, on their phone going to work. I've tried to do that kind of thing. I've tried to write in hotel rooms if I've been at an event and think, oh, I've got an hour, I'll sit down and write. I just can't do it. I can't write in public spaces. I sit at the same desk, same chair, same keyboard. I have music on, and all of these are kind of little nudges that my brain kind of goes, oh, okay, now we're writing. Essentially, it's a form of self-hypnosis. My brain is going, right, this is what we're doing, this is how we're writing. And over time, the muscle develops that my brain goes, right, this is what we're doing. And you get into a routine and it just becomes something that you kind of extend over time. Like I've talked about, you start with writing for 15 minutes and after 15 minutes, you're like, oh, I'll just check my phone, or I'll just go and put the bin out, or I'll go and check on the wife. At that point, you've already lost your concentration. So it's being able to extend that period of time, that phase of self-hypnosis, into something longer where you can sustain it for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe an hour, and then take a break and then come back if you can and do a bit more, but stay in the zone. His next rule, or at least piece of advice, is that you should start with short stories and let them develop into novels or screenplays. In theory, this is good advice for lots of reasons. I didn't do any of that. I have written maybe half a dozen short stories in my entire life. I don't know why, I never did. These days there is more of a market, I think, for short stories in anthologies and online, and lots of small publishers. There's novellas, there's novelettes. Obviously with digital publishing, short stories and other kind of shorter fiction is very popular too. If you can do that, it's a great way to invest far less time. Say you have an idea for a novel and it's going to be a huge world building thing and all these kind of characters and a trilogy or 10 books, or whatever it be. If you can start with a scene, if you can start with an action moment, a conversation, some seed of part of this bigger idea, and you write a short story and it takes a month, then you can see, right, Is it still interesting? Do I still want to turn this into something longer? Do I really want to spend a year, 2 years writing this? Am I still interested in it? That's a great investment of time, as opposed to spending a whole year writing a book, coming back to edit it that first time and going, I don't really like this anymore. I've spent a whole year and now I'm not as interested in it. I don't want to write any more stories. I don't want to do a trilogy. So starting with shorter fiction, I think is a fantastic approach if you can do it. Rule 8 is learn to write for different mediums. And I think this is valid. Even if you never intend to write a screenplay or for television or comics or games, I think studying the way those are constructed is really useful and beneficial. You can go online and find free screenplays for old TV shows and films, and there's PDF documents online that you can read now, and look at the way they focus it. Think about some of your favourite films. It's not just enough to go and watch a film and then think about it. Go watch a film and then find the screenplay, if you can, of that film, and look at the way it's set out. Look at the dialogue, look at the direction, look at the characters. And it's a really, really different process. Because when people talk about translating books or anything to TV or film, they always say, oh, it's not what I thought it was going to be. And there has to be a change. It can't be a scene for scene recreation. It just doesn't work that way. A book is a very different thing to a film or a TV show. If you don't understand that, you need to look at the forms and kind of realise the fundamental differences. There's stuff that you can do in books that you can't do in film, and vice versa. Just trickeries and things that you can do with the camera. And all these, there's so many cool different elements, and I think it's quite useful kind of for broadening your mind and learning about different forms of storytelling. Rule 9 is look for ideas that you really enjoy writing for longer periods. In fantasy and sci-fi, pitching longer series is quite common, trilogies and so on, but in other genres they have sort of standalone with series potential. So what you might be is one adventure with a particular main character. It could be an inspector in a crime novel, it could be a Jack Reacher style action book, and if that one does well, you then do another one with the same main character, but it's fairly standalone. But equally, going back to one of the previous points of starting with a short story before you go into a full novel, I think is valid too, because it leads into the idea of, I really enjoyed this short story. There's so many more ideas that are now bubbling up about the world, about the characters, about the magic system of this fantasy, how it all fits together, or I'd love to do a bunch of other adventures with these characters. I think that's really, really good. And it's the kind of thing that you should be thinking about, because if it does well, then you can do more of them. Whereas if you write something and you think, oh, this is it, I don't want to do any more of these. I've written that one book about these characters and I'm just fed up the back teeth of them. What if the publisher then says, it's done really, really well, do us another one, and you hate the book? So you shouldn't always be thinking about series potential, but you should be writing something that you want to be doing, because you could be spending a year or two writing the book, then another couple of years editing it, then you're going to have years talking about it potentially with readers, and for years it could be the one book that people always want to talk to you about. So longer periods of time spending with something, I think it's a valid concern to think about. And finally, rule 10 is get immersed in your writing process until the outside world is gone. I think that is really, really good. If you can find that way to get in the zone and just focus purely on the writing. I talked about it being a muscle, but also it's that thing of, I love the process of writing. I don't understand people who say, I love having written, like they're bleeding onto the page, like it's a struggle, like they're suffering for their art. I love writing because I'm coming up with ideas in a moment and I write things down and the characters say things and I'm not always sure, what does that mean, or where's it going, or that's a bit of a weird thing, let's explore it. And that's part of the fun. World building is brilliant, but it's not writing. I could spend years just coming up with stuff for world building and doing crazy monsters and things. And it's great for role plays. If you then turn that into a story for a role play, it's not as complicated as writing a novel. But sitting down with the characters, with the fundamentals, with the basic structure, and then seeing where it goes, I love that. And the rest of the world does fall away. The only thing I'm focused on is the page and what happens next and what's that person saying and how does the other character react. And I love the process of writing. That's why I'm still doing it. That's why one of the reasons I persisted after so many years of rejections is that I still enjoyed the process. The hardest bit was the rejections. Even after so many, it still hurts. But actually sitting down to write is just the best job in the world for me. So on the whole, I think Stephen King's advice works really well. I think some of it needs a little bit of adjustment to suit your own personal requirements, but overall, I think his advice is solid, I think it's useful, and I would recommend reading his novel On Writing, which is still something that I refer to every now and then. I think it's quite good. And he talks about some other rules in there, like he says, don't use a $5 word when a 25-cent word will do, because people won't know what the $5 word means. He'd much rather someone understands the words and gets on with the story and understands the character and has fun, rather than constantly have to go through a thesaurus or a dictionary to find out what the hell is going on. And I'm completely with him on that. So, hopefully that's useful. Maybe you can pick up some of Stephen King's writing advice. I come up with great stories. Yeah. Okay, that's what I'm going to talk about for today. I'll be back next week or next time with another video.